Welcome to Forecasting Skills. This is the second course in the How to Think Like a Futurist specialization. I'm really glad that you've come back to join us for more futurist thinking. I'm Jay McGonigal, the Director of Game Research and Development at the Institute for the Future, and I am your lead instructor for this course. But you will also be meeting and learning from lots of other futurists here at the Institute. You'll remember we're based in Palo Alto, California, and we're a nonprofit learning and research group that is dedicated to the mission of unleashing the power of futurist thinking for everyone, including for you. What is this course in particular all about? Well, most people tend to believe that the future will be a lot like the present. And that's why most people can be really surprised by or even shocked by how the future turns out. With strong forecasting skills, you can avoid future shock so that you can be more prepared to take advantage of the opportunities of the future. And in this course, you're going to learn a few key forecasting skills in particular. First, you're going to learn how to turn signals, those clues about the future that you learned about in the last class. You're going to turn those signals into drivers. And drivers tell us exactly which direction we're all heading in as we head towards the future. And then you're going to learn how to turn drivers into forecasts. And a forecast is a specific vision of what the future could be like. It is based in evidence, but it's often very surprising, and it can help spark new ideas about things that you could do, or your organization could do, or any community that you want to inspire could do to make a better future. After we've done some forecasts, we're also going to play with scenarios. And scenarios are really concrete stories that are set in a future forecast. And these stories allow you to immerse yourself in the possibilities of the future, to look around and say, what would this feel like? What would people do? What would I do? And we're going to play with some of these stories, and you'll have a chance to write a scenario yourself. Now, in the last class, you'll remember that you learned about the 7 scientifically validated benefits of futurist thinking, and I want to let you know that this course will be focusing on building 2 of those strengths in particular. The strengths of creativity, which is your ability to transcend existing ideas and think of new possibilities, and your foresight, which is your ability to anticipate what is hard for others to see, things that they can't see or just refuse to see. And with more creativity and foresight, as with all future thinking skills, you'll be better prepared to evaluate what futures are possible and which of those futures you want to help make. So let's get started. In the next video, I'm going to teach you the single most important thing that I have learned in over 10 years of working with the Institute for the Future. And I can pretty much guarantee you that you would absolutely never guess what it is. So I will tell you in the next video. Since starting my career as a professional futurist, I have probably said literally 1,000 times 4 words that have made me a better thinker, a smarter strategist, and a better collaborator. And those 4 words I learned here at the Institute for the Future: strong opinions, lightly held. Strong opinions, lightly held. And to explain to you what this means, I want to share with you one of my favorite ancient stories. This is actually a story from over 2,000 years ago. You may have heard it before, but probably not in the context of futurist thinking. This is the story of the farmer and his horse, and I'd like to read it to you now. A farmer and his son had a beloved horse who helped their family earn a living. And one day the horse ran away, and all the neighbors came round and said, "Oh no, your horse ran away. What terrible luck." And the farmer said, "Maybe, maybe not." A few days later, the horse returned, and he led back a few other wild horses with him. And all the neighbors gathered round, and they said, "Oh, your horse came back and brought more horses with it. What good luck." And the farmer said, "Maybe, maybe not." Later that week, the farmer's son was trying to train one of the new wild horses, and that horse threw his son to the ground and broke his leg. And all the neighbors came back around and said, "Oh no, the new horse broke your son's leg. What terrible luck." And the farmer said, "Maybe, maybe not." The next week, soldiers came marching into town, and they were looking to recruit boys for the army. And when they came to the farmer's house, they couldn't take his son because he had a broken leg. And all the neighbors gathered around and said, "Oh, your boy has been spared because of his broken leg. What good luck." And the farmer said, "Well, maybe, maybe not. We'll see." Now, this ancient story has so much wisdom for the practice of futurist thinking. It reminds us that we have to be really humble when we make forecasts about the future. We might think that we know what the good consequences and what the negative consequences of a new event or technology or change might be. But we have to hold that opinion lightly because it is hard to predict what unexpected consequences might unfold. So when it comes to futures thinking, this means a few really important things. One thing it means is that you should never allow yourself to be convinced that any forecast you make is inevitable, that a forecast is almost certain to come to pass, right? You want to hold that forecast lightly and be open to seeing other evidence or hearing other points of views about why that future might not be so likely. It also means that you should never allow yourself to be convinced that a particular future is definitely bad or definitely good for all people involved. You want to hold those opinions lightly and be open to hearing what other people have to say about what some positive consequences or negative consequences might be. But humility is only half the rule. That's the lightly held half. But what about the strong opinions half? It's important that futurists have strong opinions so that we can capture attention and spark imagination and provoke discussion. And I want to give you an example of a strong opinion that Institute for the Future researchers recently put out into the world to give you a sense of why it's so important to have a strong opinion in the futures that you forecast. So this is an image from a forecast about the future of health and the future of physical infrastructure. What will the cities and public spaces that we live in the future look like? As you can see here, this forecast includes a vision of escalators that you have to pay to take if you haven't worked out physically enough in the last 24 hours. And the idea here is that maybe a city or an organization wants to motivate people to exercise more, and if they have to pay money to take the escalator instead of the stairs, they will actually get a little more physical activity, take a few more steps. And this is a pretty provocative opinion. This is a pretty strong idea about the future. It imagines society taking a kind of really authoritative role in deciding, have you had enough exercise today or not? And this is a provocative and controversial idea too, I think. It's definitely not a future everyone would want to live in. And when we present this forecast, it definitely stimulates a lot of conversation and even pushback. Some people point out, well, what about people with disabilities or people with a temporary injury or a mother carrying a child? I mean, is this a really fair infrastructure? And that's great because it provokes you to talk about what you might want to do if this were a future you wanted to build. How can you accommodate more people and make this a more inclusive future while still trying to experiment with these ideas? And as a futurist, if you have a lightly held strong opinion, you can take that feedback and you can incorporate it and you can improve your vision so that you start to inch closer and closer to futures that are both interesting and plausible, but also maybe start to describe a world that more people really would like to live in. So that's a strong opinion, lightly held, and now that you know that all-important rule, you are ready to start forecasting. In the next video, we are going to ask and answer that all-important question, what exactly is a future forecast? What exactly is a future forecast? Well, we all have experience with one type of future forecast, weather forecasts. And the types of forecasts that meteorologists make about the weather actually have a lot in common with the kind of forecasts that futurists make, with one important difference. So a weather forecast is designed to help you imagine the world that you might wake up in tomorrow. It might be sunny with blue skies, it might be downpouring rain, there could be thunderbolts and lightning, fires, floods. And the purpose of a weather forecast is to help you plan and figure out, do you need to change your plans to take advantage of good weather or to accommodate bad weather? Maybe you need to take certain precautions to accommodate risk. Maybe it gives you some entrepreneurial ideas. You want to go sell lemonade on a hot day, or you want to sell umbrellas on the corner for everyone who didn't know that a rainstorm was coming. A future forecast, the kind that futurists make, tries to do the same thing. It tries to give you a really clear vision of the kind of world that you might wake up living in, maybe not tomorrow, but 5 or 10 years from now. And it tries to give you an idea of what plans you might want to make or how you might need to adapt your current goals and strategies. It can put on your radar certain entrepreneurial opportunities and risks. Really, the only thing that a weather forecast and a future forecast have not in common is that a weather forecast really wants to be accurate, right? The better and better meteorologists get, the more precise and close to 100% accuracy they can achieve. Future forecasts of the kind that we make as professional futurists, we don't need to be 100% accurate, and we really don't want to be. Because the difference between weather and the future 10 years from now is that nobody can change the weather that's coming tomorrow or next week. It is coming with or without our input or our actions. 10 years from now, we can change that future. We can actually change the world that we will wake up and live in. So that's the big difference between a weather forecast and a future forecast. We want to have a plausible prediction of what the future might be like, but we want to leave ourselves enough room to actually change it if we don't like it. And let me give you a couple examples of some super quick future forecasts so you can see how they work and also start to get an idea of what makes a good one. By the year 2030, thanks to the Internet of Things, theft of personal objects will be uncommon and almost impossible. So this is a super fast, one-sentence future forecast, and we can unpack it a little bit to see where it comes from and why it's interesting. So this forecast paints a picture of a world where a certain type of crime is disappearing. And it's based on the idea that the Internet of Things, a new kind of technological reality, will make it hard for people to steal things. The Internet of Things means that every object we interact with in the physical environment, whether it's our shoes or the table or our phones or a hat, everything will have a sensor in it. And that sensor will know where the object is. It will be communicating constantly to the cloud, to our computing devices, to our phones. And it will be really hard for anybody to take an object away from somebody else and steal it, because we will know where that object is and it will be constantly communicating. And we already see signals of prevention of theft today in current objects, like if your laptop or phone gets stolen, certain companies allow you to brick it remotely so that the device will no longer work for whoever has stolen it. There are other signals, or what we'll talk about as drivers, that make up this forecast. Things like facial recognition. If there are more facial recognition cameras and a more high surveillance environment, that might make it harder for people to steal things. Also, the rise of digital currency. If we more commonly are spending digital money instead of physical money, the idea of mugging someone on the street or stealing their wallet to try to steal money will also seem kind of absurd. in the future. So these are all possibilities that can be summed up really succinctly in just one sentence, right? In that one sentence, super quick future forecast that by 2030, theft of personal objects will be uncommon or even impossible. And this forecast should help us start to think about what that world might be like. Sure, it sounds great. Who doesn't want to live in a world without a certain kind of crime? I feel relaxed just thinking about it already. But if we think about it a little deeper, we might also realize that there will always be crime and people will always want to take resources from others. And it might provoke us to think about what will replace the theft of physical objects in the future and what types of digital crimes or digital cons might exist in the future. And in fact, people who think about the future of crime are using this forecast right now to try to predict all of the ways that crime could happen in the future so that we can get ahead of it. So that is one future forecast. Let's take a look at another. By the early 2040s, genetically modified or designer babies will be the norm in many countries, although it will be banned in other countries. Parents will feel pressured to give their children the best opportunities by diagnosing and guaranteeing good health and advantageous traits before birth. And this is a really interesting forecast for a lot of reasons. One is that it's about a really controversial topic, right? Changing the genes of our children before they're even born makes a lot of people uncomfortable. It's good to share future forecasts that make people uncomfortable, because if we don't talk about it and think about it, then we don't get to help decide how this future unfolds. It's also set in 2040s, which is a little further away. With these types of really complicated futures, it helps to give yourself a little bit more runway to think about how you might want to shape that future. One thing I like about this future forecast is that the futurist who is putting it together actually makes the case for why it's more plausible than we might think. And I'd like to read you a little excerpt from this futurist's longer forecast, because it gives you an idea of how you can make a persuasive case in your forecast. So this is from David Tal, writing for Quantum Run. He writes, while today's ethics will advocate against designer babies, once the technology is perfected, future ethics will evolve to endorse it. At a societal level, it will slowly become immoral to bear a child without the genetic enhancements guaranteed to protect his or her health, not to mention his or her competitiveness within a genetically enhanced world population. Over time, these evolving ethical norms will become so widespread and accepted that governments will step in to promote and, in some cases, enforce them, similar to mandated vaccinations today. So this helps us think about a topic that might make us feel uncomfortable and anxious in a new way. It makes the case that things that make us uncomfortable today won't always make us uncomfortable, and that society may evolve. It pushes us to consider that possibility. It is a very strong opinion, which is why it is good to consider it lightly held. But we can also use one of the skills that we learned in the first course in the specialization, look back to look forward, and we can look at the history of fertility treatments that were often early on considered immoral. In vitro fertilization, which is very common today, when it was first started, was considered to be too close to playing God, and many people were uncomfortable with it, but society has evolved to be more comfortable with it today. So now that you've heard two future forecasts that are very provocative, strong opinions, let's talk about what makes a good future forecast so that you can start to evaluate the ones that you encounter and create. It's possible. Do you have evidence? List and link to the evidence you have to make your case. It's provocative. Does it make someone stop and think? Does it spark conversation? It's plausible, but not inevitable. What's the path to this future? Who is going to work to make it real? And is there something we could do to stop it or change it? Now that you've got a handle on what forecasts are and what makes a good forecast, I'm really excited to say that you get to spend some time with one of my favorite futurists in the world, Bob Johansen, who served as the president of the Institute for the Future for more than a decade. And he literally wrote the book on our future thinking methods. It's called Get There Early, Sensing the Future to Compete in the Present. And he's going to do a mini masterclass for you on forecasting skills. I love learning from Bob. He was one of my first mentors here at the Institute, and I know you're going to love learning from him as much as I have. So enjoy.
It's easier to do 10-year forecasting than it is 1 or 2-year forecasting. Now that doesn't really make sense. Many people say to me, I can't even do 1 or 2-year forecasting. How can I do 10-year forecasting? Well, it turns out it's easier to do 10-year forecasting than 1 or 2-year forecasting. Let me give you an example. If you look 10 years ahead, you'll see we're going to have a world where there'll be sensors everywhere. They'll be very cheap. Many of those sensors will be connected, and some of those sensors will be in our bodies. That's just obvious as you look 10 years ahead. What's not obvious is how are we going to get from here to there, and who's going to make money from the process. Also, what's not obvious is who's going to make sense out of all that data from all of those sensors. So what I'm suggesting is that if you look 10 years ahead, you see things, you see directions of change, even if the world around you is very complicated. Thinking about the next decade, the world is indeed going to be very complicated. The Army War College, where the generals go to become generals and where I teach once a year, the Army War College calls this the VUCA world: volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Looking 10 years ahead, it's going to get worse. And in that kind of world, you can't see what's going to happen. And especially from close in, there's no way you can anticipate, you can predict. The word predict, it just doesn't make any sense in this kind of world. But you can do a forecast. You can look ahead, and you can see that directions, just as I was talking about with sensors. And you can tell a story about the future. And a forecast, in our way of thinking about it at Institute for the Future, a forecast is a story from the future that provokes insight in the present. So again, not a prediction, but a provocation. And we like to think foresight to insight to action. And it's a cycle, an ongoing cycle. We look 10 years ahead and kind of see that clear view, but then we back off and we say, what does that clear view provoke for us? What are the insights? For example, what are the insights for a church in a world where you have sensors everywhere? Very cheap sensors, very connected sensors, some sensors even in our bodies. What are the implications? What are the insights for a world like that? What are the insights for a local parish? So think about this VUCA world. Think about how you can take a forecast of the future. It could be your own personal future, it could be the future of your parish, but look beyond your normal planning horizon, but not so far out that it becomes kind of silly or kind of ridiculous or people won't take you seriously. Usually in my world, working with big corporations, usually it's 10 years. Occasionally, it's even further than that, and it is further than that when things are very polarized. So for example, we just did a forecast on the future of food security. And what we found was this notion of food security is so polarized, particularly in Western Europe, where our client was. Things are so polarized that we had to look 30 years ahead. And when we look 30 years ahead, you could see that the choices are much more of a wide range of choices, and they're not simple yes-no choices. So for example, in the area of food security, GMOs, the genetically modified organisms, GMO foods are so polarized, particularly in Western Europe, that people view it as a yes-no choice. Well, if you look 30 years ahead, it's obvious that it's not a yes-no choice. It's a spectrum of choices. And if you're interested in things like like global hunger, like food security, you have to be interested in food security. So again, that long view gives you a sense of alternatives. And as you're thinking about your own life, think 10 years ahead, think 20 years ahead, think 30 years ahead, but don't stay there. Use that foresight to provoke your insight to lead to action. And interestingly, it doesn't matter if you agree with the forecast you're using or not. It only matters if the forecast provokes you. And indeed, some of the best forecasts that I've ever seen, some of the best forecasts are those you don't like. Those forecasts that you say, I don't want that to happen, or I'm not going to let that happen. So look for provocative. Don't worry about prediction, because nobody can predict the future. I like to say, if somebody tells you they can predict the future, you shouldn't believe them, especially if they're from California. And I'm from California. What you can do is tell this story about the future to provoke insight in the present. So in a VUCA world, and that's where we're in, that's what we're all going to live in for the next decade. In the VUCA world, one thing we've realized is by looking 10 years ahead, you realize that volatility yields to vision. Uncertainty yields to understanding. Complexity yields to clarity. And ambiguity yields to agility. So let's break that down. Volatility yields to vision. In a VUCA world, vision gets rewarded disproportionately. Now, religion and faith, your parish, is a source of vision, and people need vision in a VUCA world. As a matter of fact, there's a frightening side of this. In a VUCA world, people are often looking for answers, even if there aren't any answers. And that's why extreme religions tend to do very well in periods of VUCA world. So you need to provide vision, but you don't want to promise things that can't be promised. You won't want to promise certainty in a world that's loaded with volatility. So uncertainty does yield to understanding. You need to understand your marketplace, your community. You need to understand what's going on around you. You need to understand yourself. So this is a period of VUCA world. It's a period of listening. And in a real sense, what we're doing is listening for the future. It's a period where so many people are talking, and yet so few people are listening. So understanding becomes disproportionately important in a VUCA world. The notion of complexity yields to clarity, but you can't be clear in any simplistic sense in a VUCA world, because it is VUCA. So what you have to do, and what the military has learned, and unfortunately the military is way ahead of the rest of us in this, because in a warfare situation, in the fog of war, you can't be clear about everything, but you can be clear about direction. So in the military, this is called commander's intent. Commander's intent. And I don't recommend that word in a parish or in a corporation. I recommend the word clarity. Be very clear where you're going, but very flexible how you get there. So set up that envelope of clarity and then be flexible within that. And finally, ambiguity yields to agility. So in the world of the future, in this VUCA world, we all have to be corporate athletes. We all have to be community athletes. We all have to be church athletes. We all have to be athletes. We have to be physically healthy, mentally healthy, and spiritually healthy. We've got to have some sense of meaning in a VUCA world, and it's very hard to get a sense of meaning in a VUCA world. So we all need that. We all need that sense of agility in order to thrive in this world. So thinking 10 years ahead, you get a fresh view of all this complexity. Even if it is a VUCA world, you can still see directions of change, just like with the sensors example I gave you at the start. And what you can do once you have that clarity of direction, that 10-year view, or you might choose to go further, then you can back off using that foresight to provoke your insight that leads you to better action in the present. And that action is going to be characterized not by sort of linear, straight line plans, but by cyclical, learn as you go. In Silicon Valley, we call this, you've got to learn how to fail early, fail often, and fail cheaply. It's rapid prototyping your way toward that future direction that you've stated with clarity. So I hope this gives you that sense of looking to the future, not to predict it, because the future is unpredictable, but looking to the future in order to understand direction, and then use that foresight to draw your own insights and plan your own action. Thank you.
To make a future forecast, you need at least one really powerful driver. And what's a driver? Well, a driver is an important change that is already underway. It could be a new technology that's just becoming popular. It could be a new scientific discovery that scientists are still figuring out what exactly they could do with it. It might be a change in public opinion or a political trend. It could be an uptick in a particular disease. It could even be a change in pattern in migration or birth rates. Let me give you a few examples of specific drivers that most professional futurists always have in the back of their mind when they're making any forecast today. Climate change. Climate change is a big driver, whether we're talking about extreme weather or increased migration away from parts of the world where it's no longer safe or habitable. Falling fertility rates worldwide. A majority of countries on Earth are now falling below replacement level for reproduction, meaning each woman is having fewer than 2 children. And this changes how old society will be in the coming decades. The end of cash and the rise of digital currencies and mobile payments, which is changing how we can do business and who can do business, when and where. And then let me give you a couple other examples of drivers that maybe aren't important to every forecast, but are of particular interest to different futurists. One is the rise of emojis. Emojis as a means of communication, it's a lot more visual, it's a lot more globally accessible, and it is changing how we talk to each other and how we relate to each other. So that's a driver of the future of communication. And drivers don't have to be global. They can be very specific to a particular region or context. So a colleague of mine is really interested in one particular driver of change in how refugee camps are serving the populations that are residents there. For example, in northeastern Nigeria, there are 7 million people who have fled violence. And the World Health Organization estimates that 1 in 5 of them will have long-term psychological impacts, such as post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, or depression. And one driver of change that people who think about these populations are looking at is the need to address mental well-being and mental safety, and not just physical well-being and physical safety in these populations. When you look at all these drivers, what they have in common is that you can describe them as moving us from a world in which X is true to a world in which Y is true. Or we will often just say from X to Y. You know you have found a good driver when you can say, this is moving us from X to Y. So for example, with climate change, it's moving us from predictable weather we know how to handle and that we have the infrastructure to survive, to a world where the weather is unpredictable and we don't have the infrastructure to live in safely. We're moving from a world where we have enough kids to take care of us as we get older to a world where we are increasingly older and not repopulating. We're moving from a world where physical currency is primary to a world where digital currency is primary, a world of communicating through words to a world of communicating through pictures. These drivers help us express a trend that's underway, a certain momentum that we have as we head towards the future. You can always stop a driver. You can reverse a driver or change the direction of change, but the driver tells us that it will require an intervention. It will require someone or something to shift the direction we're heading, because otherwise, this is the path towards the future that we're on. You might be wondering, where do you find a powerful driver for your forecast? Well, first of all, the good news is that future forecasting is a highly collaborative field. Most futurists don't invent their own drivers. We're constantly looking to see what other experts and other thinkers have created so that we can draw on the same drivers and talk to each other about what we're seeing. I didn't invent climate change or the shift to digital currency. We have a common set of drivers that we all talk about and look at, and in the reading materials for this course, we'll link you to a lot of these drivers so you can play with them yourself. But maybe you want to invent your own driver. Maybe you do want to see something that no one else has seen yet. There's a way you can do that. And this is where we start to play with those signals that we started collecting in the first course. You can invent a new driver just by looking at a lot of different signals and seeing what trend or pattern they reveal. And let me walk you through an example of a driver that I've recently become really interested in that wasn't quite represented in the futures literature before I started playing with it. So here are some signals, and we'll talk about the driver they suggest. A company called Letchal has invented some smart shoes that vibrate to point you in the right direction. They talk to your phone as you're navigating using Google Maps, and they vibrate right or left or in the front or back of the shoe to let you know which direction you should be walking. And these were invented to help visually impaired individuals who might be able to get out in the world more independently if they had a smarter shoe. But also other innovators, artists, experience designers are starting to think about how you might use shoes that tell you which direction to go for other types of experiences and consumers. There is the football fan shirt, which also has haptics inside it. Haptics, again, are the technology that allows you to feel something. They buzz, they squeeze, they vibrate. The football fan shirt allows you to feel the impact of your favorite players on the field. If they get a hit, your shirt is going to squeeze you. If there are points scored, it will vibrate to help you feel that electricity, that thrill of scoring. This is a real product. A company named Vitali has created a sports bra that has sensors and haptics inside of it. The sports bra keeps track of your heart rate to get a sense of how excited or stressed you might be, as well as your breathing rates. Are you breathing fast or nice and slow and calm? And if it senses that you are stressed out, it might give you a little hug, or it might give you a little buzz to check your phone for an exercise that you can do to calm down. There was a recent graduate student project that decided to make your closet smarter. It put sensors on all of your clothing, and if you hadn't worn it in a certain amount of time, say 6 months, your clothes would send messages to eBay to auction themselves off without your knowing about it or having to intervene at all. You'll just get a message when it's sold, and you can pack it up and send it out. Finally, Intel had a really interesting experiment where they created a dress that used sensors to monitor your adrenaline levels and would detect the hormone in your skin. That adrenaline, of course, is the hormone that puts you into fight or flight mode. And they use your adrenaline levels to change the shape of the dress that you are wearing, so that if you have a lot of adrenaline, if you are really in that fighting mode, Your dress would expand shape into a really kind of intimidating shape and let everyone around you know, watch out, don't mess with me right now because my adrenaline is flowing. I think there's actually a couple interesting drivers underneath these signals when you unpack them and look at them carefully. One obvious driver, of course, is that we're moving from dumb clothes to smart clothes, clothes that have information about our bodies, about our actions, about our environment, and can make us smarter. But I think it's more than that. I think all of these signals, all of these products, one thing they suggest is that instead of just being smart clothes, we're actually looking at smarter than us clothes, clothes that tell us what to do. Instead of us using the information to make decisions, they actually direct our actions. And that's taking it a little bit further. The idea that we would let the clothes we're wearing change what we do or change how we feel instead of us having to think about it at all. Another driver I see here is an evolution of how we use clothes to express ourselves, right? The idea that we share our personality and our feelings through what we wear. These drivers suggest that there's kind of a new way, whether it's through haptics or the shape of the clothes, that the clothes can change how we feel. Instead of us expressing ourselves, we kind of get expressed upon. It's definitely something new and different and something that I would like to keep track of and play with. And so the last thing I want to share with you in this video is a way that you might play with a new driver to see if it provokes any interesting future forecasts. So here's a technique that I use with a lot of drivers, adapted for this particular one. And it's simply a process of combining something that you're interested in and passionate about with whatever driver you've just found. So here's how it would work for you with this driver. First, you think of a problem that you care about solving in the real world. For me, it might be coming up with new and better ways to treat people's mental health. The second thing you do is you pick a concrete example related to the driver. In this case, you would pick something you're wearing right now. For example, I'm wearing a microphone to record this lecture. You might pick your shoes or a jacket or something you're wearing in your hair. And then third, you would ask how this object might work with this driver to affect the problem that you care about. So in the case of smarter than us clothes or expressive clothes, you might ask yourself, how could a smarter than me microphone help solve the challenge of coming up with new ways of providing mental health benefits in the future? This is a way for you to really roll up your sleeves and start to connect the dots between signals and drivers you're seeing out in the real world and the kinds of problems that you want to solve or the kinds of challenges you want to take on. It's really important that we not just collect drivers and think about them abstractly and intellectually. What you really want to do is see how it connects to the things that are meaningful to you. So we'll have a discussion board set up where you can play with this particular driver and any problem or challenge you care about. And it'll just give you a little bit of practice, a little bit of exercise of thinking about the future of X topic that really matters to you, and how you can start to connect signals and drivers from all kinds of contexts to something you care about. When you're looking for drivers, it's important to see beyond your own worldview and consider other points of view, global points of view. For example, I'm based here in Silicon Valley, California, and we often focus on technological drivers of change or United States-centric drivers of change. But the future is happening everywhere on the planet, and depending on where you are and who you are, you might be inspired by different drivers or affected by different drivers. So in this video, I want to share with you a collection of drivers that was curated by a futurist on the other side of the world and hopefully share with you a different way of thinking about drivers so you can expand your global vision of the future forces that are determining how tomorrow might turn out. This is Sohail Inayatullah, and he is a Pakistani-born futurist. He is the UNESCO Chair for Future Studies and currently teaches futures thinking at Tam Kang University in Taiwan. And he just published his list of the most important drivers that he's seeing right now. And here are some of them. Driver number 1, a demographic shift in Africa, such that 40% of all children worldwide by 2050 will live in Africa. And by the year 2100, 39% of all adults globally will live in Africa. Driver number 2, underpopulation in many Western and East Asian nations will create the possibility of steady state or truly green economies that aim for stable population and stable consumption of energy and materials at sustainable levels. Driver number 3, a likely hegemonic shift from an American-centric world to a China and Asian-centric century, changing what we value and changing the global hierarchy of truth, knowledge, and beauty. Driver number 4, the likely major disruption in the global food industry through cellular agriculture, the new pure meat and pure milk, and the end of the animal-based food supply chain, which means the possibility of shifting from slaughterhouses to greenhouses and food labs. Driver number 5, the shift from coal-based energy to solar and wind and other alternatives and renewable systems. And driver number 6, on top of that, perhaps the most profound shift of all, is the rise of gender equity, the beginning of true diversity and inclusion. And Dr. Inayatullah has an interesting perspective on these drivers. He says, for many, these changes are heralded as the beginning of a new era, the end of an empire, the end of patriarchy, the end of the coal oil era, the end of poverty, the end of man over nature, a transition to a new and more equitable era. So for some people, this is marvelous news. For others, these are frightening, as the assets they hold in the present, physical assets as in coal mines, psychic assets as in male domination, or cultural assets as in empire first. All of these are under threat. And this is a really important point. For some people, drivers of change may seem like an incredible opportunity, a wonderful new vision. For others, these same drivers may create insecurity or anxiety. So we always try to consider drivers from multiple points of view, because if we really want to be prepared for the change that might be coming, we can't be blindsided by it. We have to try to get beyond our own limitations of firsthand experience or our own biases, which is why it's so amazing to be teaching this course here on Coursera, where we have students from all over the world with incredibly diverse firsthand experiences and incredibly diverse points of view. So this is just another opportunity for me to invite you to make sure you're participating in the conversations with your fellow students. If you haven't introduced yourself yet, the future you're interested in, join the conversation, share what drivers you're seeing, what drivers you're inspired by, or what drivers you're anxious about. This is an amazing opportunity to build your own futures community and build your own futures network right here on Coursera. Here's a driver everyone should know about: blockchain.
When you vote, have you ever wondered whether your ballot is actually counted? If you meet someone online, how do you know they're who they say they are? When you buy coffee that's labeled fair trade, what makes you so certain of its origin? To be sure, really sure, about any of those questions, you'd need a system where records could be stored, facts could be verified by anyone, and security is guaranteed. That way, no one could cheat the system by editing records, because everyone using the system would be watching. Systems like this are on the horizon, and the software that powers them is called a blockchain. Blockchains store information across a network of personal computers, making them not just decentralized, but distributed. This means no central company or person owns the system, yet everyone can use it and help run it. This is important because it means it's difficult for any one person to take down the network or corrupt it. The people who run the system use their computer to hold bundles of records submitted by others, known as blocks, in a chronological chain. The blockchain uses a form of math called cryptography to ensure that records can't be counterfeited or changed by anyone else. You've probably heard of the blockchain's first killer app, a form of digital cash called Bitcoin that you can send to anyone, even a complete stranger. Bitcoin is different from credit cards, PayPal, or other ways to send money because there isn't a bank or financial middleman involved. Instead, people from all over the world help move the digital money by validating others' Bitcoin transactions with their personal computers, earning a small fee in the process. Bitcoin uses the blockchain by tracking records of ownership over this digital cash, so only one person can be the owner at a time and the cash can't be spent twice, like counterfeit money in the physical world can. But Bitcoin is just the beginning for blockchains. In the future, blockchains that manage and verify online data could enable us to launch companies that are entirely run by algorithms, making self-driving cars safer, help us protect our online identities, and even track the billions of devices on the Internet of Things. These innovations will change our lives forever, and it's all just beginning. To learn more about the urgent future of the blockchain, please visit iftf.org/blockchainfutureslab.
I'm going to show you a simple three-step technique for creating a new future forecast that can instantly provoke conversation and spark imagination anytime, anywhere. All you need is a driver and a topic that you care about. So here's how you do it. First step, pick any driver of change, and as you know, this can be a new technology or scientific breakthrough. It could be a new policy or law. It could be a shift in public opinion. Any new change of direction, pick that driver, and then step 2, combine it with a future topic that you care about. You've already chosen your own future of X, at least a couple of specific topics that you're really interested in investigating over the course of the How to Think Like a Futurist specialization. So this might be the future of food, or the future of education, the future of augmented reality, the future of LGBT rights globally. Whatever the topics you picked are, you're going to take one of those, and now you're going to combine it with that driver you picked in step number 1. And you'll, step 3, ask yourself, what does this future topic look like in a world with this driver? How might this driver of change impact the thing that you're really interested in? And let's pick a specific driver and some different topics to see how this might produce really interesting and diverse future forecasts. One driver of change, and no wordplay or pun intended, that is on everyone's mind right now is the emergence of autonomous vehicles or self-driving cars and trucks. Now, whenever you want to start a new future forecast, it's really good to check in with the driver, meaning if you've been tracking some change or some shift that's been going on for a while, you want to know the state of the art. Where exactly is this driver today? So if we're going to play with autonomous vehicles, it's really good to check in and see how far along is this technology exactly? How many of these vehicles are out on the roads? Where are they being tested and deployed? What countries are investing in the infrastructure? And that way our forecast can be grounded in more evidence and more reality. So I went and checked in on the state of this trend, the state of this driver, and here's what I found out. In the United States, there's one self-driving company, Waymo, that has already racked up 10 million miles on real public roads. So that is a huge advance from the last time I checked in. In the United States, we have 9 different companies testing in 20 different cities, from Las Vegas to San Francisco to Boston. But it's not just in the United States. There are actually 75 pilot studies globally being sponsored and supported by governments everywhere from the United Kingdom to Australia to Germany to Switzerland, and China in particular seems to be investing a lot in this space. They have the goal of putting 30 million autonomous vehicles on the streets within the next few years, starting in 2020. And how do I know all of these things? Well, the good news is you do not have to be a PhD in the subject area of the driver that you're investigating. I literally just put into the Google search engine questions like, how many self-driving vehicles are on the street today, and which countries are using self-driving cars? So the great thing about futurist thinking is when you're curious about something, you can always just do some quick research and lean on the evidence and data that people are already collecting and tracking, and you can use that to inform your forecast. Okay, so we've got an up-to-date driver. We know exactly what's going on with self-driving cars. What about the future topics? Let's just take 3 future topics that some of my students have chosen at Stanford as the ones they want to investigate, and we can work with them to see how forecasts might emerge. So here are 3 topics: the future of restaurants, the future of real estate and housing, and the future of laws and legislation. So these are 3 really different domains that might all be affected differently by the emergence of self-driving cars. And here are 3 quick forecasts that some of my students came up with in response to the driver of self-driving cars. For the future of restaurants, here's one forecast. In 2030, people will consume more alcohol as they will no longer need to worry about how to get home safely without driving under the influence. Plus, they will be able to consume inside vehicles. In this future, restaurants and bars will sell more alcohol. Okay, so that is a forecast that is affecting one particular industry. And what's useful about this forecast, I think, is that when people outside of the industry of restaurants hear this forecast, they might be interested too. For example, the field of medicine might be interested in a future in which people are consuming a lot more alcohol because of the long-term impacts to our bodies and health of drinking a lot more alcohol. So as forecasts start to come out from one field or one topic, they can expand and be interesting to other fields and topics. How about the future of real estate and housing? Innovators will come along with many awesome uses for driveways and garages that no longer contain cars. We don't know what that will be yet, but it's a huge innovation space to explore. I like this forecast because anybody could pick it up and play with it. Anybody who's a designer or an architect or an engineer or who just lives somewhere where they have a garage or a driveway can start to imagine what they might do with that space in the future if we no longer need to have our own cars. It definitely sparks innovation and imagination. And finally, in the field of the future of law and legislation, different cities, states, and countries will develop different laws. In some, driving yourself may actually become illegal within the next 10 years, while other countries may continue to allow it for a long time. Meanwhile, some lawmakers will try unsuccessfully to block autonomous vehicles. There will be many legal battles over who can drive where for years to come. So this is an interesting forecast because if you're in the field of law or policymaking, or you're a voter who might be able to influence policymaking, this gives you a lot of juicy stuff to think about and chew on. Do you want to live in a world where you are no longer legally allowed to drive a car? Or do you want to stop autonomous vehicles from being allowed to drive where you live? There's a whole spectrum of possibility here, and those laws have not been written yet, and those policies have not been created yet. And we all have an opportunity, whether we're going to be passing the laws, enforcing the laws, or just living by the laws, to influence which laws they will be. And what all 3 of these forecasts have in common is that they suggest both opportunities and risks for people who are interested in these topics or affected by these topics. And that's really, again, what makes a good future forecast, is that you hear it and you say, aha, there's something here that I might want to act on. There's a change I might want to make or an idea I might want to experiment with so that I can decide whether or not this future becomes a reality. I have one last trick for you when it comes to making your first future forecast, which is a series of questions that you can ask about any driver or topic so that you can start to come up with some specific ideas, right? What will become much more common over the next 10 years as a result of this driver? What will become much less common over the next 10 years as a result of this driver? What new thing will be possible in 10 years that is not possible today? What new problem might exist in 10 years that we haven't had to face yet today? What else might be different 10 years from today that might catch people by surprise? Maybe ask all of these questions and see which one sparks the most specific, concrete, and interesting idea for you. Welcome to week 2 of your forecasting skills course. And this week is where forecasting skills get really fun to grow and experiment with, because you've got some of the basics down and now we're going to do it at a higher level and get a little more complex with our forecasts. And you may have noticed this jar of jelly beans over here. I always bring jelly beans to class when we get deep into the more complicated future forecasting skills, because it's a reminder that while forecasting is based on evidence and there's a lot of data and science and rigor involved, it's also meant to be a really creative process that we should have fun and play with, because creativity allows us to come up with forecasts that surprise people. So I'm here to tell you that signals and drivers are essentially just like jelly beans, and not just any jelly beans, but my favorite type of jelly bean, which you may have encountered before, Jelly Belly jelly beans. And if you've ever had a bag or box of Jelly Belly jelly beans, you may have seen recipes on the back that tell you how to combine the flavors of the jelly beans into new complex flavors that don't exist in a single bean. So for example, one of my favorite Jelly Belly recipes, I happen to know that if you take 2 blueberry jelly beans and 1 lemon and 1 butter jelly bean, and you pop them all into your mouth at the same time, it is supposed to taste like a hot buttered blueberry muffin. And I can tell you, it does, it's true. And there are literally hundreds of recipes, and you can pop different flavors into your mouth and experience something bigger than just one bean. And that's what we're gonna do with signals and drivers, because every signal and driver that you find, it has its own flavor, and it produces a different feeling when you think about it. It might be curiosity or excitement or delight or anxiety. And when you pop these different feelings and flavors together into your mind at the same time, they can create a more complicated idea that doesn't exist in just a single signal or driver. And to show you how this works, I'm not going to eat these jelly beans, actually. I'm going to eat the future by sharing with you a few signals that suggest a few drivers and share with you one of the forecasts that I'm working on right now that comes as a result. So here we go. All right, the first signal is a new technology called 3D printing for food. Now, you may have encountered 3D printers in other contexts, and 3D printers, instead of using ink to print words or pictures on a page, they use physical materials to print everything from new computing components to physical objects to things we can even build houses or cars out of. And now we have the material to print food using the same technology. You can put different nutritional components, different food coloring, different flavor components into the printer. You can 3D design foods and objects that do not exist in nature, that have never been eaten before, and you can make these beautiful, weird-looking, fun-tasting food objects just by plugging in a recipe into the printer, and it comes printed out on the other side. Okay, so that is a signal. Another signal comes from some research that our food lab did here at the Institute for the Future, and we've seen other people picking it up and replicating it as well, which is that you can actually use virtual reality to change somebody's taste perception or how their taste buds perceive food that they are eating. For example, you can convince them that they are eating juicy chicken instead of tofu, or you can convince them they're eating an orange instead of a grapefruit. And not only has this been tested in labs, but individuals are kind of taking it up as a challenge to prototype systems that could help them eat healthier. I found this signal just last week, actually. Somebody at a virtual reality hackathon decided to prototype a system that would allow him to eat healthier. And he was literally replacing French fries with carrot sticks in virtual reality. He could see and feel the French fries, but in reality, he's eating carrot sticks. And he actually reports that he was able to trick his brain and other people's brains into enjoying the food almost as much as they would enjoy a real French fry. Pretty interesting. Another signal that I am very excited about, but also slightly anxious about, which is always with a good signal, you should have multiple feelings about it, is something out of a virtual reality lab at Stanford University, Jeremy Bailenson virtual reality lab. They created a cow simulator. In virtual reality, you get to be a cow, you crawl around on the floor, which is a haptic input floor. So as you crawl around, it moves your cow avatar around the virtual reality space, and you get to enjoy being a cow and seeing other cows and eating grass and looking up at the sky. And then the simulator slowly leads you out of the field, out of pasture, towards a slaughterhouse, and that is the end of your virtual reality experience. And what's interesting about this signal is that they ran some research and found that people who participated in the simulation went on to consume less red meat in the 2 weeks after the experiment, even though they had not been asked to do that. The researchers asked them lots of questions about how much they exercise and how much they were drinking, and the red meat was just one of the questions. And it turned out that they were eating less red meat. So this idea that virtual reality could be used to change our eating behavior in other ways, maybe by giving us more empathy, perhaps, for the animals that we would otherwise eat. And then we're seeing environmentalists advocate for new information on food packaging that, in addition to seeing the nutritional information, such as the calories and the fat content or the vitamin content, that we should see carbon footprint content. So what is the carbon impact of that cheeseburger that you're eating? What is the environmental cost to it? And people are advocating to have this information on every food item we purchase, just the way we have nutritional information today. All right, let's combine these flavors of the future, all of these signals, see what drivers they suggest and what forecasts might bubble up as a result. You've got 3D printing, which can invent food that we've never seen or eaten before. You've got virtual reality being used to change food perception and eating behaviors. And you've got a desire to change people's eating behaviors to have a lower carbon footprint, as well as to eat healthier. Okay, so we add all these things up together. What are the drivers that we're seeing? Well, one driver we're seeing is that 3D food printing will be allowing us to create food that's never existed before, and this might make food imbued with a sense of discovery and curiosity and creativity. So maybe we're moving towards a future where we have this kind of renaissance of discovering new food together. We're seeing the driver of people wanting to reduce the carbon footprint of their food, so moving towards a future where we are more conscious of the carbon impact of our food and actively making an effort to reduce it. We have the constant drive for people wanting to make healthier food choices so they can maintain their health and be in better shape. And then we have the driver of virtual reality being used to change food perception and food sensations. So combine these all together, and what forecasts might we come up with? Well, here's a forecast that I think describes a future that we are likely to experience. I call this future, yes, you can play with your food. And this future describes a world in which we all play with our food more. Here's how I would describe it. In 2029, virtual reality technology will be common in cafeterias and restaurants as a way to indulge in favorite foods and live out our food fantasies while eating more healthfully and more sustainably. Meanwhile, 3D printers at home will bring the fun to nutritious, sustainable eating like Lego or Minecraft for cooking. Once you have a forecast like this, then you can start to combine it with topics of interest and see how it might play out in different domains. And I'm going to throw up on the screen a really interesting set of ideas for innovations from a company called Project Nourished, which is a startup company in California that's taking very seriously the idea that in the future we might use virtual reality and augmented reality to play with our food more to achieve a variety of mental health and physical health goals. Everything from weight loss to allergy and diabetes management to what we'll eat in space when maybe we're all traveling to Mars in the future. And so take a look at that, and when you're done, I'll see you in the next video to do another demonstration of how we can combine flavors of the future into a really intriguing forecast. Time to grab some more jelly beans, signals and drivers, and take a look at one of my personal favorite future forecasts that I tell everyone about. I'm really excited about it, and everyone hates it, which makes me want to talk about it more. So here we go. First signal, the fact that most people who try a new fitness tracker, a wearable device that tracks their steps or their sleep or their heart rate, a majority of people stop using them after 90 days. And this is an interesting signal because it suggests people want to know their health stats more, but it just gets old over time and we don't stay engaged. So, this is a problem. How will it be solved? Interesting signal. Second signal, fantasy sports. So fantasy sports is blowing up as an industry. In the United States, it was $3 billion spent last year. Globally, it's much more. Fantasy sports, of course, is a kind of betting where you take real information and real stats about real athletes and combine them into your own custom fantasy team to see how it might perform. And this is a really popular pastime that is generating billions and billions of dollars. And anything that's generating billions and billions of dollars is a signal worth paying attention to. Signal number 3, fantasy health ball. This is a combination of fantasy sports and fitness trackers. Always fun to see a new signal that combines two other signals. This was an effort that turned into a book that you can actually still find online if you're curious, where one person wanted to get in shape and lose weight, and he and all his friends were doing fantasy sports, and he decided the rules of his league would be that you have to earn your recruits. If you want to draft the best players, you have to take 20,000 steps today, or you have to climb 50 flights of stairs, or you have to eat this many vegetables. And so you can't just pick an athlete, you have to earn it through your physical activity. Fast forward a few years, a professor actually just filed for a patent and received it for combining fantasy sports and physical exercise. A professor at the Illinois Institute of Technology filed for this patent, and patents are a great place to look for signals anytime somebody is trying to lock in an idea that they had so they can profit from it in the future. That is a good signal that they may be building or making something interesting. Next signal. There is a new sports league called fan-controlled football, where fans of the team actually call the plays and decide which players will be put into each position. They use their smartphones to vote before the games and during the games in real time. So instead of a coach, you have all of the fans using their collective intelligence to decide what happens on the field. One of the teams that's really popular is called Screaming Eagles. A follow-up on the signal, which I started tracking a couple years ago, actually, the CEO of this fan-controlled football league has been really vocal lately in talking about blockchain technology, another important driver that all futurists are tracking. And the CEO believes that blockchain will make fan-controlled sports and fantasy sports much safer and more stable in the future, because when you combine betting on sports with fans controlling what athletes are doing and what advantages they're receiving, then there's possibility for all kinds of cheating and exploitation. Blockchain will be able to track who's putting money where, who's benefiting, who's voting. Maybe you won't be able to gamble on something that you have helped influence or decide. This will help make this a more secure pastime, more transparent, and so an interesting signal to track. And the last signal that I'm looking at in this forecast is the rise of esports. So currently, there are more people watching other people play video games competitively than almost any other professional sporting league within the United States. That we're on track to having more people watch professional video gamers play video games than any other sport except for the National Football League. They'll watch more video games than basketball, baseball, hockey, and soccer. And so this is an interesting signal, because when I look for the driver underneath it, it reflects that there's an expanding view of what sports can be. Right? That it's not just the same old games that we've been playing for decades, and that bringing technology into our games is a plus. So let's add up all these signals and think about the drivers that are underneath them that we might want to combine into one big, spectacular forecast. Some of the drivers I'm seeing here that I want to take into account are the fact that more people want to track their fitness and increase their physical activity, but they're not meeting their goals. They're having a hard time staying engaged. We're seeing fantasy sports continue to grow in popularity and expand thanks to the internet and social networks. We're seeing fan-controlled sports as a really exciting innovation and entrepreneurial opportunity. Esports is expanding our notion of what a sport is and who gets to play, and blockchain technology is making all of this more secure and safer for fans and investors to participate in. Add it all up, and what kind of world might we wake up and find ourselves living in? Here is my forecast, which is a bit of a leap, but I think it's possible and worth considering. In the year 2030, many professional sporting events will incorporate fan physical activity as a way to give advantages to their favorite teams. For example, all of the fans of a particular football team might add up all of the steps and use those steps to buy a power-up for their favorite team, such as an extra penalty kick. Or tennis fans could pick their favorite players and use their steps or miles to buy their favorite players a third serve at an important point and vote on when that third serve could be used. Basketball fans could use their physical activity to earn extra free throws and vote for when those free throws are given out. American football fans can earn extra downs for their favorite teams and decide which games or which plays they want them used on. And at first, this may seem like it completely destroys the purity of sport, which is why I really like this forecast, because when I talk about it to many sports fans, they get really upset with me. They think that this is a terrible idea and a future they would not like to live in at all, because they're used to the way that sports are played today, and the idea that fans would somehow be involved instead of just the athletes, it somehow ruins what they love most about the sport. But as a futurist, I really enjoy provoking people to think about how things might change due to forces and drivers that are really powerful and might be more powerful than your or mine or our collective desire to see things stay the same. So I offer this up to you as a strong opinion, very lightly held, but as an example of a forecast that can really help us really analyze, are we prepared to truly imagine that the future could be different, even about the things that we love the most?
Hi, I'm Lynn Jeffrey, and I'm Director of Foresight Training at the Institute for the Future. And I want to share with you one of my favorite tools today, which is called Reveal Unexpected Possibilities. The reason I love this tool is that it asks you to bring together three completely unrelated things. And when you think about how the future is actually going to happen, it's not going to happen because of a single driver or a single signal or even two, but because of a combination of multiple forces. And this tool really helps you understand what those might be and what they might look like. Good times to use the tool are when you are in the middle of a research project and you already have a lot of really good signals and you're trying to come up with a way to think about, as the tool says, unexpected futures and unexpected forecasts. And you could also use it with a group of people when you've got them together and you've shared a bunch of signals. So you have all these signals, this is a great thing to do with them. You may find the tool a little hard, just letting you know. It's designed to be challenging. It's pretty easy to bring together any two things, any two signals, and think about a potential future. But when you add a third, you might find that it's exponentially more challenging, but it's also exponentially more interesting. So let's take a look at the tool, Reveal Unexpected Possibilities. Are you ready to reveal unexpected possibilities? Here's what to do. First, pick three random signals. Hopefully you've started collecting signals as part of your daily futures thinking habit. Maybe you're bookmarking them in your internet browser, or keeping them in a Google Doc, or writing them down in a notebook, or sharing them in a Slack channel, or emailing links to yourself with the word signal in the subject so you can find them easily later. Wherever you're collecting your signals, go pick three of them completely at random. The less they seem to have in common, the better. Now, fill out the tool with the three signals, listing one signal in each space. Next, take a moment to drill down into what each signal means. Start with that all-important from what to what question we often use to start analyzing signals. What kind of change, what direction of change does the signal represent? Try writing a from X to Y statement next to each signal, like this. Now you're ready for the creative work to start. Can you imagine encountering all three of these signals in a single surprising experience in the future? Take a leap of faith, and even if it seems ridiculous, let your imagination run wild. Your idea doesn't have to be the most realistic possibility. This tool is for discovering strange, surprising possibilities. The tool is really fun to use with a friend or in a group. Sometimes it takes more than one person to spark a truly unexpected possibility. So share your three signals with others and see what they come up with. When you're ready to play with a different set of signals, start over from the beginning. Pick 3 new signals and try it again. You might not come up with a world-changing idea every time, but that's okay. The goal is to expand your mind and embrace a much wider spectrum of possibilities so you can see new opportunities and new risks that would otherwise be hard to see. And that is how you reveal unexpected possibilities. So thanks for joining me, Georgia.
Thanks, Lynn. So happy to be here.
This is Georgia Gillen, and we're going to play with this tool. So this is Reveal Unexpected Possibilities, and basically what we're going to do is take 3 different signals of change and create a new idea. And who knows where we're going to end up with our new idea.
I definitely don't know yet.
I heard that you have 3 signals that you've already collected that you
true.
think are especially exciting or scary or interesting.
Yes.
So what are your 3 signals?
So my first signal is that in the US, 1 out of 3 GoFundMe campaigns are to cover medical bills.
So GoFundMe is the crowdfunding platform.
Correct.
1 out of every 3 crowdfunding campaigns on GoFundMe is to cover medical costs.
bills in
Wow.
the US.
Okay. So let's write that down as one of our signals.
Okay.
Okay, and what's your second signal?
My second signal is there is a Japanese startup called VAC, which has developed AI software to be installed in security cameras in order to identify potential shoplifters.
So a camera uses artificial intelligence inside a store to predict who's going to shoplift?
Right.
Wow. Okay, let's write that down as our second signal on the worksheet. All right, so what's your third signal?
So my third signal is about a group of people part of the Birth Strike movement.
Birth strike, okay.
And so this is a group of 60 people who are choosing not to have kids because they believe the environment will become unlivable as a result of climate change.
Wow. So they're choosing not to have kids. They
They're
don't want to
choosing
bring
not to have
kids
kids.
into a world that's shaped by climate change.
Right.
Okay, great. Wow, 3 really interesting, super different signals. We're going to write the third
Yes.
signal on here. All right, so the way we use this tool is we're going to look across our 3 signals. We have the 1 out of 3 GoFundMe crowdfunding campaigns to pay medical bills, the Japanese AI security camera that predicts who's going to shoplift inside the store, and the birth strike movement of people who are so worried about the future of climate change that they don't even want to have kids.
Right.
And somehow we're going to bring these 3 together and create a new possibility.
Okay.
So it's the year 2030, and we're trying to imagine how these 3 signals might create something different or something new in the world. It could be a new behavior, could be a new platform, could be a new social movement, who knows? So the first thing that we're going to want to do is think about some of the big things that are jumping out when you take 2 of them together. 3 is often really hard to work with, but if you just start with 2, like what happens when we combine GoFundMe medical bills with an AI security camera that predicts shoplifting? Any ideas come to mind?
So
And it's okay if they don't.
So maybe since a lot of people can't afford to pay their medical bills, and this AI system predicts behavior.
Right.
Um,
And fraudulent behavior.
fraudulent
Or
behavior.
like some kind of theft.
So if these combine to create, predict when people will lie about their health conditions.
to get money from other people on the crowdfunding platform?
Yeah.
Maybe?
That could
be.
work.
So what we're going to do is we're going to write these couple of just the seeds of the ideas. We'll write them
Okay.
right here.
Okay.
Did you have another idea?
I was kind of thinking, like maybe these cameras or this software is installed in cameras, like on your computer, so that when you're signing up for your health insurance or writing to your doctor about symptoms, maybe the camera software will be able to predict whether or not you're being truthful about your symptoms or your medical history or what have you.
I love it. So you can see how, and one of the ideas, we kind of biased it more toward the crowdfunding side of things.
Right.
And on the other one, we sort of biased it more toward the AI camera predicting some kind of medical interaction or engagement.
Maybe these cameras are even just in like the doctor's office waiting room.
Oh, I
And
like
so
that
people
one
are
too.
walking around and you can detect their fidgety or
I love it.
some. Okay.
Let's write it down.
Okay.
All right. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to pair up two of the other ones.
Okay.
So it's pretty easy to think of the relationship between two things. It's much harder when you add a third.
Okay.
We could actually add the third. Let's add the third to the ideas that we already came up with.
Okay.
And see what happens. So we have AI software that could be in a medical waiting room. We have AI software that's in a device that's kind of analyzing how people are interacting with their medical providers. Or we have AI software that's analyzing people who are doing crowdfunding campaigns to try to see how truthful they're being. So let's now add in this birth strike movement of people who are really worried about the future and really worried about climate and making medical decisions
Right.
based on that. Could be something like there's a group of people who have an agenda related to climate change. It's a political agenda,
Yes.
and they're pretty committed.
Very
And then
adamant.
there's some kind of software system, AI enabled, which is able to detect dishonesty and claims that they're making. And there's a third party that they're making claims to who they're trying to raise money from.
Right.
I think all those elements combined
be,
could make
yeah.
something really interesting. How about this? People who are suffering from some kind of climate-related health issue, like respiratory disease,
Yes.
for example. They are going on to, or maybe they are having, maybe their home has been flooded, or they live in an area which has drought or something like that. So they're going online. There could be more instances of people using crowdfunding to raise money to support themselves and making claims about that it's climate related.
Right.
And then there could be some kind of predictive software which is analyzing the truthfulness of those claims.
Okay.
So it's a future, so the new
Yeah.
possibility is a future where AI verifies the climate suffering claims of people on crowdfunding campaigns. Okay, so let's write that one down. So sometimes when you do this exercise, that's why it's unexpected. It may not be a possibility that you like,
Right.
but it's really good for getting you to think in ways that you would never have thought.
I definitely would not have thought of this.
Right. So it takes you in different directions.
Yeah.
And if you feel like this is not the direction that you want to, this isn't the destination where you want to end up, then you could start to work out some of the different angles that we talked about.
Yeah.
So maybe it would be something about people interacting with their doctors. Or maybe the other way to do it is we started by combining signals 1 and signal 2, the security camera and the GoFundMe. We could then, I think this is very interesting and provocative.
it is.
But if you felt like you wanted to keep playing with the tool, you could say, all right, what about if I start with the birth strike movement and I combine it with the security camera? Or if I start with birth strike and combine it with GoFundMe.
Right.
And then you would start to
lot of
develop
new
some of
things.
those seed ideas. And the best way to do this is with someone else. It's a lot easier
Yeah.
to do with a partner.
And more fun.
Yes, and
So
more
far.
fun. Yes. So, thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. This was great.
When it comes time to communicate your future forecasts to other people, one of the most effective strategies that you can use is to start with a scenario. What's a scenario? Well, it's a story that we tell about what the world might be like in the future, and it's based on a forecast, but it becomes a little bit more concrete, a little bit more immersive. When you present someone with a scenario, they can really situate themselves in that future and ask themselves, what would I feel like if I woke up in this world? What would I do? What might other people do? And it gives you a way to have a really personal connection with a possible future. What I'd like to do now is share with you a few examples of early stage scenarios. Now, scenarios can be developed into short films or immersive virtual reality experiences, or you can present them in comic strips or short stories. But at the very early stage, a scenario is just a few sentences, maybe a short paragraph that describes a world. And I'm going to share with you some of these early stage scenarios, and then we'll talk about the kinds of questions that you can ask people to consider when you share a scenario so they can really develop some insight about that future. Are you ready for a world in which video faking algorithms are now so advanced, faked videos are impossible to distinguish from real footage? These video faking algorithms can completely replace people's faces and speech to make it appear they've said or done anything the author intends. With this technology, anyone can manufacture video proof to back up any claim. And these video fakes are flooding major video sharing, social media, and live streaming platforms, including all of the platforms that you love to use. Are you ready for a world in which facial recognition technology is now a mainstream tool available to any individual or any organization? Subscribers can tap into a global database with over 1 billion faces, indexed and clearly recognizable. Cameras are installed in most public and private spaces now to take advantage of this technology. And a new ecosystem of apps emerges that integrates facial recognition across all product categories and everything we do. Facial recognition in dating apps, shopping apps, neighborhood apps, games, and more. Are you ready for a world in which read and write neurotech implants are a reality? A device can be implanted in your brain that reads your thoughts and feelings and also writes new artificial thoughts and memories directly into your brain. The best version of this product successfully intercepts 80% of all data that is sent to your brain's hippocampus, giving you close to perfect recall of anything you have directly read, seen, or experienced. This neurodata is saved in the cloud, where it can be sent to other people's implants so they can remember what you have read, seen, or experienced. These scenarios are all based on existing technologies and existing startups, even the Read and Write Neurotech one. And I know you will want to see them for yourself, so I will make sure that we have links to all of the signals that informed these forecasts and scenarios in the reading materials for this week. And the thing about a scenario is when you give it to someone, you want to use it to start to provoke conversation and insight. So here are some of the questions that I always ask people to consider when they are playing with a new scenario. And if you'd like to get hands-on with this, you can pick any of those 3 scenarios and ask yourself these same questions. What new things might happen in this world? What would be different from today for you personally? What would you personally worry about in this world? What would you worry about on behalf of your company or as a government or any organization that you are a part of? A school, a hospital? What could go wrong for this group and why in this future? Who benefits from this future? What do they gain? What emotions do people feel more of in this future? What do people start to do to adapt or cope in this future? Who could exploit this future? What would they try to game or cheat or take advantage of? What actions might people take in this world to make the world better? Any of these questions could spark some really worthwhile ideas, help you think about the choices that we're making today, the technologies we're building and adapting, the businesses that we're building, and help you play out some possible consequences before we're actually living in them. In the next video, I'm going to walk you through a hands-on process of creating a scenario and then bringing it to life in a more immersive form into a short documentary video from the future. I'll see you there. People often ask me, what's your favorite future that you've ever worked on, or what's your favorite scenario that you ever came up with? And in this video, I'm going to show you the favorite scenario that I've ever worked on. And it started a few years ago when the Institute for the Future had the opportunity to partner with an organization called the ACT Foundation, which is a nonprofit that is really interested in reinventing higher education so that people can continue to learn throughout their entire lives and careers, and so that higher education and ongoing training and reskilling can be affordable and something that we don't have to go into lifelong debt in order to pursue. And they asked the Institute for the Future if we could help them imagine a really dramatic alternative to today's higher education world. And so we did. And that scenario has had a really big impact already in the field of education technology. So I'd like to share with you some of the signals that our scenario team worked with to develop our idea about one possible world we might wake up in one day. And then I'm going to show you the 7-minute short film that we made to communicate this scenario, a kind of mock documentary of what our educational experience might be like 10 years in the future. So let's take a look at those signals. The first signal we took really seriously, which was not at all from the field of higher education, but we thought it would be really important to take into account, was Bitcoin. When we started this work, Bitcoin was just becoming really popular. This was a number of years ago. And we were paying attention to things like the fact that Bitcoin represented really the first totally decentralized currency that you could send money from anyone to anyone else, anywhere in the world, without any kind of intermediary or authority. You didn't need a bank or a government backing your currency. You could just send them the money. And that all these transactions would be part of a constantly updating ledger that everyone would have access to, so anyone could see where all of the currency was at any time, and who had sent it to who, where they had gotten from, and you could see this whole chain and record of the currency passing from one person to the next. And one of the things that we like to do at the Institute for the Future to kind of stimulate creativity and innovation in our thinking is to ask, if a certain kind of change could happen in one field, what would that same kind of change look like in another field? So if Bitcoin represents a certain kind of decentralization and the emergence of a new kind of ledger in the field of finance, what might the same kind of decentralization and the emergence of a collective ledger look like in the field of education? And that was really our starting base. So we began our forecasting process with questions like, what would happen if higher learning and credentialing were as radically decentralized as money has been by cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin? And what would a system that values learning that happens anywhere and by anyone look like? What if anyone could be a teacher and teach something to anyone else, the same way that Bitcoin lets you send money from anyone to anyone? You don't need a formal institution in between. What if anyone could give a learning credential to anyone else without a college or university or training center in between them? We also asked, what if a degree, which has an end date to it, what if it became more like a constantly updating ledger, where you don't finish your education and then go on to your career, but instead you have a record that's always updating with new transactions your entire life? In other words, could we imagine the Bitcoin of education? Alongside Bitcoin, we found another important driver, which was the emergence of a blockchain technology called smart contracts, which is the idea of programming the blockchain to execute certain actions when certain criteria is met. So if you're dealing with a currency, for example, you could program the blockchain every time you receive a payment of over 1,000 Bitcoins to send 5% of it to your friend Barry. But if you're paid over 10,000 of that currency, he gets 20%. Maybe this is some rule that you've established, some relationship you've set up, and the blockchain will just do it automatically. It knows the rule, it knows the contract, and it will execute it for you. So we started to look at this signal as another possible twist to a forecast for the future of higher education. And we asked ourselves questions like, what if learning credentials were paired with smart contracts? What if the things you learned could be tied to future payments or future transactions? What kind of new contracts could you come up with to help people pay for their education and to continue learning throughout their careers? A few other signals we wanted to bring into the conversation were things like this headline on the cover of Consumer Reports magazine: "I kind of ruined my life by going to college. 42 million people owe $1.3 trillion in student debt in the United States alone, and it is ruining their economic lives." We wanted to take into account this idea that people are starting to question the return on their investment. Can they really afford to go into this much debt for the kinds of degrees that exist at colleges and universities today? And finally, one other signal we threw into the mix, and this is really just one tiny signal amongst many, but I couldn't help myself. I saw this headline: 8-year-old drives to McDonald's after learning how to drive on YouTube. And I love this signal because it really points to a change in our assumptions about when we have developed a skill and who is qualified to teach it to us and in what context we can actually learn something. If an 8-year-old feels like they want to learn how to do something, they can go onto YouTube and there will always be someone there who has the skill already and is willing to teach it to you when you need it. This kind of just-in-time learning, and that you can learn whatever you want, whenever you want. You don't have to wait till you're at the right level or you're at the right age or you're at the right institution, that you can learn what you want when you need it. This seemed like a pretty important signal to bring into the conversation and into the forecast too. So I'm going to share with you what all of these signals turned into as we developed a forecast and a specific scenario within this forecast. So with that in mind, here is a possibly ridiculous seeming future that is inspired by all of these signals and drivers from the future of blockchain and higher education. Enjoy.
Your ledger account tracks everything you've ever learned in units, called EduBlocks. Each EduBlock represents 1 hour of learning in a particular subject. Anyone can grant EduBlocks to anyone else. You can earn EduBlocks from a formal institution like a school or your workplace. But you can also earn them from individuals or informal groups like a community center or an app. The Ledger makes it possible for you to get credit for learning that happens anywhere, even when you're just doing the things you love. Your profile displays all the EduBlocks you've earned. Employers can use this information to offer you a job or a gig that matches your skills. We'll keep track of all the income your skills generate and use that data to provide feedback on your courses. When choosing a subject to study in the future, you may wish to choose the subject whose students are earning the most income. You can also use the Ledger to find investors in your education. Since the Ledger is already tracking income earned from each EduBlock, you can offer investors a percentage of your future income in exchange for free learning hours. Our smart contracts make these agreements easy to manage and administer. The Ledger is built on blockchain, the same technology that powers Bitcoin and other digital currencies. That means every EduBlock that has ever been earned is a permanent part of the growing public record of our collective learning and working.
Always learning, always earning. That's my motto. I try to learn something new every month, but it ain't easy. I'm a freelance delivery driver, so my schedule isn't steady. One thing that helps, I love to read. So I listen to a lot of audiobooks when I'm driving. Memoirs, history, philosophy. Oh, and I got that app that gives you blocks whenever you finish a book. I'm part of a learning group, a bunch of other drivers I met on a forum. We all take turns teaching the group. Sometimes we add blocks to our profiles, but it isn't really about that. It's more like Ledger has opened up people's eyes to the fact that teachers are everywhere.
I started teaching last summer right after the federal government announced the Pay It Forward program. You know about that, right? If you have federal student loans from college, you can pay them down by teaching someone else what you learned. Whatever blocks you earned in school, you can teach them to others. The University of Texas, that's where I did my degree, they report all my college credits directly into the Ledger, so I'm pre-approved to teach any subject I passed. Like virtual reality programming. If I can teach someone that course, I get $2,500 off my debt. I use the same textbook that I used in college, and I Skype with them 3 times a week to answer questions and help them with their coding assignments.
Sooner or later, most people find themselves at a point in their learning where they need to make a decision. Do you go for the traditional college degree or build your own higher education? That's the kind of tough choice that a lot of young people are facing right now.
Yes, I won! This is Texas Fold'em. It's one of those protein folding simulators where you learn how proteins work inside the human body. And you can help solve puzzles for science. Every time you solve a puzzle, you earn this biochemistry EduBlock, and the better you get at it, the harder the puzzles get. Well, I guess I got pretty good at protein folding, because one day, this trophy showed up, and they started giving me super hard puzzles working on these mind-blowing structures that even the real scientists haven't figured out yet. But wait a minute. I'm one of the real scientists now, actually, because I'm not just earning EduBlocks now, they're also paying me for every puzzle I solve. This game is sort of like my first class in biochemistry, and it's also my first job.
We used to have this concept of entry-level jobs. You would start with a company and then you could move your way up. That's how I started here. We hardly have any full-time jobs here. We mostly hire on a project basis. We check their ledgers, and if their credentials match our needs, then we'll put them in the hiring pool. Of course, relationships are still important, and we still help people grow. They're earning EduBlocks with every hour of work they put in.
Why give someone a generic test when you can actually evaluate their work in a real-world context? When you log into a verification site, it gives you a task, a chance to demonstrate your proficiency in a real-world context. You can write some copy, translate some text, design a logo, grade an essay. This is actually how most pay-it-forward verification works these days, and pretty much any credentialing that you do on informal learning. You're even paid for your time. Not the going rate, more like minimum wage. When did anyone ever get paid for taking a final exam?
Every project we hire for, we don't just list the monetary compensation. We also list exactly how many EduBlocks in which skill areas we'll grant you. That way, your work here counts as learning for your next gig.
When it's my turn to teach, I take it really seriously. Because for me, learning has always been the one thing that's connected everything else in my life. Where I've been, where I'm going. I may not know where that is yet, but I know I won't be a driver forever. And when I get there, I know I'll still be learning.
I do want to talk to you about one of our favorite mantras here at the Institute for the Future. If you were to come visit us in Palo Alto, you would see this plastered across one of our front windows. It says, "Any useful statement about the future should at first seem ridiculous." And this really gets back to the idea of having strong opinions lightly held, that you want to say things that are provocative and that are surprising and that seem a little bit absurd because, first of all, these are the kinds of ideas that represent real change, right? If you really want to innovate or you really want to make a significant change in society, you have to have ideas that are far outside the mainstream. So it's okay to present forecasts or tell scenarios that seem absurd to some people. That feeling of discomfort or disbelief is often a sign that you are moving people out of the comfort zone of the present to consider really important ideas. And it also gets to the idea that it's the futures that we don't expect and that we don't believe are possible that are the ones that blindside us and shock us. And if you are always refusing to consider possibilities that seem far-fetched, then you are likely to be the person who didn't see the future coming. So we do like to talk about the somewhat ridiculous seeming ideas. When I was first starting out at the Institute for the Future, I found that one of the most helpful things I could do was just take in as much of the research as possible, to read as many forecasts and listen to as many scenarios as I could so that I could just start to get an intuitive feel for how a forecast should sound or what a scenario should feel like. And so what I wanted to do in this week's video is just give you a chance to hear some more scenarios and just kind of sit back, relax, and take them in. And just get a sense of how exactly is a scenario told. You know, you can notice that it's presented like a fact, as if it's already happened. A forecast is about something that will happen. It's almost like a kind of prediction, but a scenario is more like a news story about a reality that's already here. And as you listen to these scenarios, you can just get a sense for that storytelling technique so that when it's time for you at the end of this course to write your own scenario, you'll have that real feel and ability to craft one yourself. So here are a few more scenarios from the ethical operating system, and I hope they provoke some really strange and interesting ideas for you. Here we go. Are you ready for a world in which major employers worldwide all subscribe to a smart employer service that evaluates a person's suitability for workplace cultures and stress levels using their public social media posts and their likes. Algorithms can identify individuals who are likely suffering from various mental illnesses, from depression to sociopathy. The service also predicts who may develop symptoms of mental illness in the near future based on trends in their posting. This data is used to offer support and resources to current employees, to recommend reassignment when necessary, and to make hiring decisions in the first place. Are you ready for a world in which a major social network company purchases a top US bank and becomes the first social credit provider? It bases mortgage rates, loan approvals, and credit access on deep data collected by its social platform. It takes into consideration the credit histories of your close friends and family, locations you have visited, including frequency of visits to places like bars and legal marijuana dispensaries. And it uses semantic analysis of messages and photos to indicate whether you are generally happy, angry, anxious, or depressed. And all of this data can affect what financial opportunities you have in your future. Are you ready for a world in which 25% of online orders are delivered by drone? Many of these drones are fitted with cameras and other sensors to collect data as they fly over neighborhoods, providing an additional revenue stream for shippers and merchants. Individuals who opt for free, unlimited drone delivery consent to the collection of data from their homes and their yards. Entire neighborhoods where drone delivery is legally permitted are subject to the same data collection activities, even though not all of their individual residents or households have explicitly consented. Are you ready for a world in which a new blockchain-powered platform called Venge allows users to place anonymous bounties on actions that are designed to harass or terrorize specific individuals? These actions include doxing, revenge porn, swatting, social media harassment, vandalism, and even violence. With one tap, you can pay someone else to act on your anger, your frustration, or your hate. Smart contracts pay out the bounties immediately in untraceable cryptocurrencies upon proof of completed action. Just as the internet made it easier to anonymously harass other people online, the anonymity and lack of regulation in the case of cryptocurrencies makes it easier to now pay people to carry out acts of hate in real life. So these are some pretty challenging and not the happiest or most optimistic of scenarios. I do want to give you a chance to look at the signals and drivers underneath them, so check out this week's reading materials. Maybe these are scenarios that inspire you to take action today to prevent these futures, because not all scenarios describe worlds that we do want to live in. Next week, our final week for this course on forecasting skills, we are going to answer the question, what do you do with a forecast after you've made it? As futurists, we spend most of our time looking at least 10 years into the future. So I thought it would be fun to go back and look at a forecast that I made 10 years ago, back in 2009, and we could see, did this forecast hold up? Does it actually look like the world we're living in today? And more importantly, did anybody benefit from it? Was there information in this forecast that people took advantage of? Did it change their actions or their strategies? So I will see you next week, not in the future, but in the past. 10 years ago, the National Academy of Sciences asked the Institute for the Future if we could help them essentially make a list of the weirdest new technologies that might have a big impact on society, especially on our security as a nation. And we took on that project, and one of the technologies that we thought would be really interesting to look at, and that seemed to be maybe not on as many people's radar as we thought it should be, was the CubeSat, which is short for Cube Satellite. And here is what was true of a Cube satellite in 2009. And it's still true more or less today. CubeSat is a miniaturized satellite. You can hold it in your hand. It weighs as little as 3 pounds or 1.33 kilograms. It is built using commercially available off-the-shelf components, so anybody who has some instructions can build one. You don't need to be in a special laboratory. And anyone can launch this CubeSat that they have built and customized into space, into orbit, to have it navigate and sense data and send data back to Earth, and that you don't need to be NASA or a space agency to do this, that you can piggyback on a government launch or even a commercial space launch to put your satellite into space. Now, what would you do with the CubeSat? Why would you launch your own satellite into space? There are a number of things that you could do with the CubeSat that were just sort of beginning to percolate as ideas at the time. You might use it for climate monitoring, that you could send a satellite up in space to look for information that would tell us how climate change is actually playing out on Earth. You could use it for disaster response. You could use the cameras to document areas that might need assistance. You could take photos and capture data in space of things that are happening in space, that you could use CubeSats to demonstrate and test new technological ideas. For example, the idea that you could use a commercially available mobile phone to navigate satellites in space. You just send a phone up in a CubeSat and see if it works. You could even create artificial stars, and you could program your CubeSat to blink in Morse code to send messages back down to Earth. These are all things you could do with CubeSats. And so what we did for this forecast and for this scenario is we imagined a future in which the price point of CubeSats came down dramatically and enough people became interested in them that CubeSats became as common as having your own website. If you have a website, why not have a satellite and express yourself in space and do something interesting in space? So what you're going to see now is our forecast video. It presents two different scenarios and asks some questions about what any of us might do with a CubeSat in the future, which is actually today because we made this video 10 years ago. And here it is.
What if you had a precision lens above the Earth? What if you could broadcast a message anywhere in the universe? What if you were witnessing history before your eyes? What if you never got lost again? What if you could protect the ones you love? What if you could see the stars up close? What if you could run one experiment in space? Join the first public satellite network, ISAT.
Your organization needs a space program. You keep hearing that, but what does it mean? What are the benefits? And what will it cost? Prime Orbit specializes in space solutions for global business. From our launch location in Brazil to a geosynchronous orbit of your choosing, we handle all of the technical details. And what do you get? A secure network of orbital units, accessible anytime, anywhere. The stability and speed of the interstellar internet. A year of guaranteed functionality. Prime Orbit, you're not just global, you're orbital.
You just watched our forecast about what we thought CubeSat reality would be like in the year 2020. Let's catch up with actual reality and see what is going on with CubeSats today. How popular are they? How many have been launched? What does it cost today to launch one? And let's see what kinds of innovations and strategic decisions have been made by people who were paying attention to CubeSats from the beginning. So here are some updates. When we created the forecast, only 100 CubeSats had ever been launched. As of today, there have been over 2,000 CubeSats launched. So maybe not a global phenomenon yet, but the trend is continuing, and there are more and more CubeSats being launched than ever before. The price point has been reduced. When we made the forecast, it cost $40,000 to get a CubeSat into space. Now the lowest price point available is $8,000. Not $99 like in the forecast, but certainly a move in the direction of more affordable access to space. When we made the forecast, 100% of CubeSats were being launched by academic researchers, grad students, undergrads working on teams, scientists working in university labs. Today, 10 years later, less than half of CubeSat launches are academic, and it's actually expanded quite a bit outward, where a majority are now commercial projects and amateur projects by people who are just interested in touching space but don't have any kind of formal academic or research affiliation. They are going places we did not anticipate. At the time, CubeSats could only be launched into Earth's orbit, but CubeSats are actually now being planned to be sent to other planets. CubeSat for Mars, CubeSat for Jupiter. So this has gone somewhere we had no idea it would go. They're also being used to think about asteroid deflection and detection. When we did our expanded forecast, this was one of the innovation areas that we suggested seemed really promising, that one of the best uses of CubeSats would be to monitor space debris to see what might be coming in a trajectory towards Earth so that we would have more time to deflect an asteroid. And that is actually one of the current use cases by governments and by space scientists. So that has actually happened. There have been a number of legal challenges to CubeSats. So even though they were designed to be launched by anyone, it seems that some companies have taken this a little too literally, and just recently the United States government sued some private commercial launches for not putting information into some official state registry. It turns out that right now CubeSats do need to be registered with the government so they can know everything that's being sent into space, and some companies are claiming free space rights to just launch whatever they want, whenever they want. So there's a kind of legal challenge that's being looked at today. That was a part of our longer forecast, was thinking about how this would call into question who owns space, who monitors space, who governs space, who regulates space, and that is turning into a really thorny topic that's still being figured out today. A couple of the things that we've seen from groups that engage with our early research, we're seeing that a number of satellite manufacturers have gone through major restructuring, some to focus on smaller navigational and smaller building components to essentially compete with the CubeSat phenomenon. And some companies have had massive layoffs because it turns out people don't want to build as large a satellite anymore, that this is a phenomenon that's affecting the entire satellite industry, not just amateurs. And so that's been an interesting business trend to see the companies that started to evolve and adapt sooner to CubeSats have been more successful. And one of the big adoptions of CubeSats that we've seen that I like to think our forecast had a little something to do with is that governments are using CubeSats and a CubeSat strategy to increase their space resilience. So if major satellites were knocked out intentionally by a bad actor, by an adversarial nation, and that would compromise our internet, our surveillance, our security, that the governments would be able to launch swarms of CubeSats to replace that quickly and affordably. So that's been an interesting thing to track. I mean, the upshot of all of this is that CubeSats are still an emerging space 10 years later. One of the strange things about thinking like a futurist is we're always trying to get there early, but I have found in my career, we get there too early. We have so much foresight that the things we anticipate happening in 10 years often take 15 or 20 years to play out. I've seen that again and again. So what that often means is that a forecast from 10 years ago, you just dig it back up, update it with some new information, and it's still actually a really useful tool to look ahead into the future. I would certainly be willing to make a forecast for 2030 that looks a lot like the forecast we made for 2020, where we will see more and more actors getting involved in space innovation and space exploration, and this technology continues to advance so that we will be democratizing who gets to participate in space. So that's one journey back to the past to look back to the future, and hopefully gives you an idea that you can be free and flexible in your forecast. They're not binding contracts. You can come back and look at them and update them and revise them and revisit them. I invite you to bring creativity and flexibility to it, just as we always try to do here at the Institute. Congratulations, you have reached the end of the Forecasting Skills course. You have learned how to turn signals and drivers into forecasts. You've learned how to pull interesting scenarios out of your forecast, how to hold strong opinions lightly held and follow all the twists and turns that the future takes. As we move into the next course, you're going to have the chance to build your skills of really immersing yourself in these forecasts and immersing yourselves in these scenarios so that you can move from foresight, or being able to anticipate what the future might be like, to insight, of really having those aha moments where you can decide, here's what I should do in this future, here's what I would do in this future, here's what I would like to do in this future. When you think about a forecast or scenario, that's really the what of futures thinking. What might happen in the future? As we move forward in these courses, you get to go to the so what part of futures thinking. If that's what might happen, then so what? What are the implications for me, for my family, for my business, for my community? And then as we finish the progression of the course, we will get to the now what part of futurist thinking. And now what, of course, means now that I figured out the so what, how can I act on that insight to take action today? So congratulations, you've got the what. Next is the so what, and I will see you in course number 3, Simulation Skills.